I want you to imagine a line in the sand, just a really simple line.
Okay.
On one side of that line, you have the entire world, everything you can see and touch and taste and just experience. It is this massive open field.
Right.
And then on the other side of that line, there are exactly 4 things, just 4 individual items.
That is a very specific image to start us off with.
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
But now I want you to imagine that a ruler comes along. Could be a king or a politician or a priest or maybe even just a corporate CEO.
Sure.
And he walks up to that open field and he pulls out a marker and draws a second line. And then he draws a third.
And a fourth.
Exactly, a fourth. And suddenly that wide open field is just full of fences.
And the person standing out in that field,
Right.
you didn't ask for those fences.
Right.
You didn't vote for them. But suddenly you're standing in a box.
You are in a box. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are looking at a stack of documents that argue that the box you are standing in isn't just annoying, it is actually a literal form of slavery.
Which is quite the claim.
It's a huge claim. We are talking about dietary laws, specifically the Islamic concepts of halal and haram. But I really need to stress this right at the top for you listening.
Yeah, we should clarify this immediately.
If you think we are about to spend the next hour reading nutritional charts or, debating the merits of gluten-free versus keto, you are definitely in the wrong place.
Right, because the sources we have today, specifically these theological and jurisprudential texts titled Divine Boundaries and The Alchemy of Sustenance and Divine Sovereignty, they completely upend the standard conversation.
They really do.
Usually when we talk about religious diet, we talk about hygiene, we talk about cleanliness.
We talk about germs. We just assume that ancient people banned pork because they didn't have refrigerators, right? I mean, that is the standard cocktail party factoid.
Totally.
You hear it all the time. Oh, it was hot in the desert and pork spoils fast, so they banned it to stop people from getting sick.
It is easily the most common explanation out there. And it's comforting because it makes ancient religion sound
scientific.
Exactly. But the texts we are rigorously analyzing today, they argue that this is not only wrong, but it fundamentally misses the entire point.
Right.
They argue that haram, the forbidden, is not a health plan. It is a political manifesto about human liberty.
And that right there, that is the hook that just grabbed me. The idea that what you put in your mouth is essentially a declaration of who owns you.
Who holds sovereignty over you.
Right. Is it about hygiene or is it about sovereignty? And that is the mission of our deep dive today. We're going to break down these texts to move beyond that surface level list of forbidden foods.
We really want to uncover the underlying philosophy here regarding divine sovereignty and the definition of human freedom.
And we should state clearly up front, as we always do, that we are just imparting what is in these source materials.
Right.
These texts touch on some highly charged political and economic concepts. Left-wing, right-wing, authoritarian, libertarian, we are not taking any sides here.
We are just the messengers. We are reporting impartially on the philosophical arguments presented in the pages of these specific books. We aren't endorsing them. We just want to convey the ideas exactly as the original authors intended.
Exactly. And I have to say, looking at my notes, I was honestly shocked by the tone of these texts. I really expected something archaic.
You expected standard dogma.
Yeah, like, thou shalt not do this because I said so. But this reads like a modern treatise on political economy. It feels so systemic.
It really is a comprehensive worldview. It discusses economics and psychology, the human self, and even statecraft.
Statecraft, yeah.
And I think the best place to start to really get our heads around this is right where the text starts, with the definition of liberty.
Let's do it, because we throw that word around a lot. Freedom, liberty. But what does it actually mean in the context of these documents?
Well, usually when we think of laws or prohibitions, we think of them as the exact opposite of freedom.
Right. If I tell you, don't eat that, I am limiting you. I'm restricting your options.
Precisely. And that is where the source material makes its first major argument. It asks a really fundamental question. Who has the right to restrict you?
Who gets to draw that line in the sand?
Exactly. Who has the authority to draw it? And the text lays down a baseline rule.
Mm-hmm.
All humans are created equal. No human has a superior right or a supreme authority over another human being.
Okay.
So if a ruler or a religious scholar or a legislative institution forbids something that God has actually made lawful, which is halal, they are essentially claiming to be gods.
Wait, so the implication is that if a human being does it...
If a human being does it, it is slavery.
Okay, hold on. Let's unpack that for a second, because that sounds incredibly extreme. I mean, we have laws everywhere.
Sure.
I can't drive 100 miles per hour down the street. I can't build a shed in my backyard without a zoning permit. Are these texts saying that all of those everyday rules are slavery?
In a strict theological sense, according to this framework, yes, potentially. The argument is that they are usurping the role of the ultimate sovereign.
The ultimate sovereign meaning God.
Right. Follow the logic the authors lay out here. If I tell you what you can and cannot put in your own body, and I do so based purely on my own authority, maybe because I think it's bad for you, because I think it's gross, or because I want to control the agricultural market, I am asserting ownership over you.
You are acting as my lord.
Exactly. I am setting myself up as a deity. The text actually uses very specific visceral language here. It calls these human restrictions chains and shackles.
Chains and shackles. Wow.
It says that when humans create lists of forbidden things that God didn't forbid, they are voluntarily putting on chains. They are enslaving themselves to human legislators.
Which makes following man-made prohibitions a form of polytheism.
Yes, the text explicitly calls it shirk, which is the Islamic term for associating partners with God, or polytheism, because you're treating a human legislator as if they possess divine authority.
So in this framework, halal isn't just permissible. It's not just a green light at an intersection. Halal is a literal declaration of freedom.
It really is.
It's like saying, unless the creator of the universe specifically said no, the answer is a resounding yes. And no human, no government, no culture can tell me otherwise.
Yes. That is their concept of divine liberty.
Yeah.
And the text uses that beautiful analogy of the open field that you started us off with.
I want to go back to that, actually, because the visual is just so strong to me.
The open field represents the default state of the world. The text argues that God, as the sovereign, the only entity with the legitimate right to restrict human action, drew a fence around exactly 4 things.
Just 4. We will get to those 4 things in a minute. But the point is, he fenced off these 4 tiny little areas and said, do not go here.
Right. And what is the implication for the rest of the field?
Well, by definition, the entire rest of the field is yours.
It is open. It is vast. The text explicitly says that by limiting prohibitions to a tiny number, God intended to leave a vast open field of liberty. The absolute default state of human life is permission.
But humans, we just love fences, don't we?
We really do seem to prefer them.
We do. Just look at any religious community or even completely secular ones. We start saying, oh, well, that looks suspicious. Let's fence it off.
Or my grandfather didn't eat that, so let's put a fence there.
Or this new diet fad says carbs are evil, so let's fence off all the weed.
And pretty soon your open field is just a maze. It's a labyrinth of little cages. And again, the text argues that this is shirk. By acknowledging these man-made fences and treating them as sacred or legally binding, you're accepting a restriction on your liberty that the sovereign never authorized.
It's a fascinating inversion. It frames God not as the entity that restricts you, but as the entity that protects your freedom from other restrictors.
That is a profound way to put it, actually.
Thanks.
The divine law limits the prohibitions specifically to keep the field open. The author's argument is that if you remove the divine law, you don't actually get more freedom.
You get human tyranny.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You get a million petty tyrants telling you what to eat and wear and think.
Okay, so we've established that the list is supposed to be short to preserve liberty, but how short is short? Because I've seen lists of dietary restrictions in other religious traditions that run for pages and pages. Leviticus is not exactly a pamphlet.
Right, but the source material is adamant about this.
Yeah.
The list of divine prohibitions contains only 4 items.
Only 4.
Only 4.
Yeah.
And they're listed explicitly in the text. Number 1 is carrion.
Which is basically dead meat, right? Like roadkill.
Essentially, yes. Any animal that died of natural causes or fell off a cliff or was violently killed by another animal or just not slaughtered properly, that is carrion.
Got it.
Number 2 is flowing blood.
Okay.
Number 3 is swine or pork. And number 4 is food dedicated to an entity other than God.
And that's it.
That is the entire list.
No shellfish, no mixing meat and dairy, no caffeine.
Not in this text.
Yeah.
Not as a foundational divine prohibition.
Wow.
The text actually categorizes these 4 into 2 distinct groups, which really helps us understand the underlying mechanics of them.
Okay, break that down.
The first 3, the carrion, the blood, and the swine, are categorized as physical prohibitions. They are tangible. You could physically touch them and measure them.
Right.
But the 4th one, the dedications, that is an ideological prohibition.
Yeah.
It's completely invisible.
I want to dig into the physical ones first, specifically the pig, because this is where I think the biggest disconnect lies between these ancient texts and the modern mind.
We love the why.
We are obsessed with the why, and specifically we are obsessed with the medical why.
The medical myth, as the authors call it.
Right. If you went out right now and stopped 10 people on the street and asked, hey, why is pork forbidden in Islam? I guarantee 9 of them would say, because pigs are dirty.
Or they carry tapeworms or trichinosis.
And they would feel very smart saying it, too.
They absolutely would.
I would feel smart saying it. It just makes logical sense. Pigs roll in the mud, they eat garbage. It feels highly logical to assume that the prohibition is just a primitive health code.
But our source material completely rejects that premise. And I don't mean it just politely disagrees. It aggressively dismantles that idea.
Let me play devil's advocate for a second, though. We know about trichinosis today. We have microscopes. We know about parasites. Why is the text so dead set against the idea that God might just be looking out for our cholesterol or our gut health?
Because if the prohibition is based purely on hygiene or chemistry, then the law becomes conditional, it becomes temporary. The text argues that if you tie the divine law to the germ, you kill the law the very moment you kill the germ.
Okay, give us the clean pig hypothetical from the book. This was honestly my favorite part of the reading because it feels so sci-fi.
It is a brilliant thought experiment. The text asks the reader to imagine that science advances to a point where we can raise a pig in a completely sterile laboratory environment, like a sealed biodome.
Like a high-tech clean room for computer chips, but for bacon.
Exactly. It is fed, sanitized, organic synthetic feed. It is pumped full of whatever future medical tech is needed to ensure there's zero trichinosis, zero bacteria, zero parasites.
Right, it's pristine.
It is objectively cleaner than the free-range cow grazing in the muddy field next door. The meat is chemically and biologically pure. The text poses the question, is this pig still haram?
And the answer?
The answer is an emphatic yes. It is absolutely still haram.
That really forces you to shift your entire perspective, because if the cleanest pig in human history is still strictly forbidden, then the ban was never actually about the dirt.
It was never about the dirt. And this is where the text brings in a really helpful analogy, the analogy of the stolen ghee.
Walk us through that one.
Okay, so ghee is clarified butter. Imagine you have 2 identical jars of ghee sitting on a table in front of you. Jar A, you went to the market and bought with your own hard-earned, honest money.
Fair enough.
Jar B, you sneaked over and stole from your neighbor's pantry.
Okay, I'm a thief now.
Just for the hypothetical. Now you take a sample from both jars and put them under an electron microscope. You analyze the chemical composition. You look at the fat content, the vitamin, the literal molecules. Can that microscope tell you which one is stolen?
Of course not. Chemically, they are perfectly identical.
Exactly. There is no theft molecule. There is no sin germs swimming around in the stolen butter. But in Islamic jurisprudence, one is halal lawful to eat, and one is haram forbidden. Why?
Because of the moral boundary? Because a law was broken to acquire it.
Precisely. The text argues that pork and blood are essentially similar to the stolen ghee. They are forbidden simply because the sovereign drew a line.
So it's a test.
It is a test of obedience to authority. It is not a dietary health plan. It's all about sovereignty. God said no. That is the beginning and the end of the legal reason.
But wait, the text doesn't completely ignore the physical nature of the animal, does it? Because I remember there was a whole section about revulsion.
Yes, and this is a really interesting, nuanced point the authors make. They argue that while the legal reason is purely about sovereignty, there is also a universal revulsion at play.
A psychological element.
Right. The author notes that across human history, and importantly across completely unrelated cultures and languages, terms like you pig or you swine or you're corpse eater are universally used as severe insults.
That's totally true. You never hear someone screaming, you sheep or you cow, with that same level of venom. Calling someone a pig implies something very specific. Greed, filth, a complete lack of shame.
Exactly. The source suggests this linguistic evidence indicates a deep-seated, perhaps innate human aversion to these specific items.
Like we are hardwired to be grossed out by it.
Right. It suggests that the human self is naturally repelled by the idea of eating a decaying corpse or a scavenger animal, even as some human cultures eventually override that natural revulsion. So the prohibition actually aligns with a natural human tendency, but the legal force still comes strictly from the divine decree.
Okay, so we have the 3 physical prohibitions sorted: dead meat, blood, and the pig. Those are the tangible ones. Now we really have to get into the 4th one.
The ideological prohibition.
Right. And honestly, I think this is the one that is the absolute hardest for a secular mind, or really even a modern religious mind, to truly grasp.
Food dedicated to other than God.
Yeah. The example the text gives is a rich dish of pulo, or let's just say a really nice steak. High quality, premium meat,
Okay.
cooked perfectly, bought with completely honest money. Physically, it is pure. It is what the text calls tayyib, wholesome, and good.
Physically, it is absolutely perfect. You could serve it in a Michelin star restaurant and people would pay hundreds of dollars for it.
But if the person cooking it or serving it says, I dedicate this food to this ancient saint, or this is an offering for this holy grave, or this is niyaz for this religious figure, the text argues it instantly becomes haram mutlaq.
Haram mutlaq, absolutely forbidden.
Right. It puts that perfect Michelin star steak in the exact same legal category as the rotting roadkill or the pig.
It does.
Why? I mean, why is a simple mental intention or a verbal dedication powerful enough to turn physically pure food into spiritual poison?
Because of shirk. We have to circle back to that core concept of ultimate sovereignty. The text argues that God is the sole sustainer. He's the Rab, the provider.
Right.
When you eat, you are essentially engaging in a transaction. You are acknowledging that this sustenance, this life-giving energy, came from the sovereign.
It's an invisible contract.
It is absolutely a contract. In fact, the text mentions that before eating any lawful meat, a person must pronounce God's name. They must say Bismillah.
In the name of God.
Right. And the author emphasizes that this isn't just a quaint little ritual or a polite habit before dinner. It's a profound legal acknowledgement. You are stating out loud, I have the right to take this animal's life and consume its energy only because the Supreme Sovereign expressly gave me permission to do so.
So if I dedicate that very same food to a saint or a shrine,
You are actively breaking the contract. You are acknowledging a provider or an authority other than God. You are saying this food is here because of this saint's blessing, and according to the text, that is a direct violation of the exclusive sovereignty of God.
you are eating at the table of a false god.
That is the exact framing, yes.
There was a story in the source material that really illustrated just how serious this ideological boundary is. The anecdote about the teacher and the students.
Yes. The author recounts a vivid memory from his own life. He was a young student, and there was a local festival going on where people were handing out niyaz.
Which are the food offerings dedicated to a saint.
Right. It's an incredibly common cultural practice in many, many parts of the world. And it's just simple food, sweet rice or candy. And the young student naturally stretched out his hand to take some.
Which is a pretty normal reaction for a kid. Someone offers free candy, you take it.
Right. But his teacher was there, and his teacher slapped his hand away.
Flat out slapped him.
Slapped him hard. And the teacher said, do not touch that. It is strictly forbidden. Now, the student was totally confused. He was probably hurt and deeply embarrassed because physically it was just ordinary sweet rice.
It wasn't poison.
But the teacher explained that by accepting it, you are validating an entire system where humans set themselves or their deceased saints up as partners to God.
Wow.
It was a harsh but clear lesson in ideological purity.
It really drives home the point that this entire system isn't about nutrition at all. It is entirely about allegiance.
Precisely. It is a declaration of allegiance. The text argues you cannot claim to be a free human being, to be a servant only of the ultimate creator, if you are willing to eat the food of the idols.
This leads us perfectly into the next major section of the sources, which is titled The Alchemy of Sustenance.
Yes.
Because we've established that food isn't just about calories and macros in this framework. So the burning question becomes, what does this forbidden food actually do to you if you eat it?
And here, the text makes a critical distinction between the biological body and the self.
The physical machine versus the soul.
Correct. The text states quite clearly that physiological reality dictates that haram food digests just fine.
Which is obviously true. If I eat that stolen loaf of bread from earlier, my stomach doesn't magically know it's stolen. My digestive enzymes don't go on strike.
Exactly. The text points out that animals operate purely on this biological level. An animal doesn't care if the grass it eats is stolen or legally owned. It just eats and it grows.
Right.
And if a human eats haram food, whether it is pork or stolen food or even expensive food bought with corrupt embezzled money, their physical body will still grow.
They will get strong.
They might even be an elite Olympic athlete. The proteins synthesize the muscles, form the brain fires, biology works.
But
the human self, which the text calls the insanizat, is a completely different entity. The text argues that the true self is separate from the biological shell, and the self can only be nourished by halal sustenance.
so what exactly happens to the self when you feed the physical body haram food?
It suffers from a condition called ithm.
Now, ithm is usually translated into English simply as sin.
Traditionally, yes. If you pick up a basic translation or hear a Sunday school version, you just see the word sin. But the source material digs deep into the classical etymology of the word, and it is fascinating.
Let's hear it.
The word ithm relates directly to an old Arabic term, nakat al-athlat.
Nakat al-Athlat, what does that translate to?
It literally refers to a she-camel that is too utterly tired to keep up with the rest of the herd.
A slow, exhausted camel. That's the linguistic root of the word sin.
Yes, it implies severe weakness,
Yeah.
fatigue, lagging behind the pack. So the text completely redefines Edom. It's not just a black mark in a divine ledger. It is a literal paralysis of human potential.
That is a completely different paradigm for looking at morality.
It really is.
Usually we think of sin as badness. You eat the forbidden fruit and you instantly become evil or corrupted. But this is saying you just become incredibly tired.
You become spiritually lethargic. It creates this heavy disconnect between your innate potential and your actual reality. The text argues that consistently consuming haram retards the development of the self. It drastically reduces your capacity for high moral action.
Give me a practical example of what that looks like in a real person.
Well, imagine someone who intellectually knows exactly what the right thing to do is in a given situation. They see injustice happening right in front of them. Maybe they see a coworker being harassed or someone being bullied on the street.
Okay.
Intellectually, their brain says, step in and stop this. But they can't.
They freeze.
They lack the internal drive. They lack the moral courage. They feel this overwhelming heaviness holding them back.
Just like the slow camel lagging behind the herd.
Exactly like the camel. The text argues that this specific heaviness is the direct result of the self being starved. You might be physically incredibly strong. You might be hitting the gym every single day, but your inner self is completely malnourished because it has been fed exclusively on haram.
So you become less human.
You become less human because the very thing that makes us human, that divine moral spark, that ability to choose the difficult right action over the easy wrong action, is actively atrophying.
It's like putting cheap, dirty diesel fuel into a high-performance petrol engine. I mean, the car might sputter along down the road, but it's never going to run the way it was originally designed to.
And eventually, if you keep doing it, the engine seizes and stops running altogether.
This is all very, very individualistic so far. We've talked a lot about what I choose to eat, what I mentally dedicate, how my individual self is affected by my choices. But the texts take a sudden and very sharp turn into the collective right about here.
They do.
And honestly, this is the part of the reading that felt the absolute most radical to me. This concept of the systemic dilemma.
It is the part that usually makes modern readers the most uncomfortable.
Oh, absolutely.
Because it actively takes the heavy responsibility off the plate of the individual and places it squarely onto the shoulders of the state and the society.
The big question posed in the text is essentially, can you be an individually halal person in a collectively haram system?
And the source's answer is a resounding, devastating no.
Explain that, because on the surface, that sounds completely hopeless.
The text argues that sustenance, the Arabic word is rizq, isn't just the literal piece of bread you are holding in your hand. Rizq is the entire complex economic chain that brought that bread to your table.
Okay.
If a state's overarching economic system is built on man-made, non-divine laws, specifically laws that structurally allow for worker exploitation or usury and interest, or deep systemic injustice and inequality, then the entire economy is collectively categorized as haram.
Wow. So wait, even if I am a strict vegan and I only buy my vegetables with money I earned from a totally normal, boring 9-to-5 job.
If the banking system that holds your paycheck operates on usury, or if the corporate labor laws exploit the farm workers who pick those vegetables,
then I am eating fruit from a poisonous tree.
Exactly. The text pulls no punches here. It says that in such a corrupt system, the individual obsessive pursuit of pure food is largely a delusion.
A delusion?
Yes. It compares it to trying to purify a single drop of water while you are drowning in a polluted river.
That is incredibly heavy. It basically says that personal piety, spending hours at the grocery store, checking the microscopic ingredients, avoiding pork, making sure the animal slaughter was perfectly correct, all of that is practically meaningless if you aren't simultaneously fighting for a just economic system.
Meaningless might be a slightly too strong word, but the text certainly argues it is entirely secondary.
Right.
It states that a true Quranic state is absolutely required to establish a macroeconomic system where halal sustenance is even structurally possible.
Right.
Without that larger structure in place, your individual piety is just a desperate struggle against the current. You're basically swimming upstream in a river of sewage.
It really profoundly reframes the definition of what a religious person even looks like.
It does.
It's not the quiet guy in the corner who is hyper strict about checking for trace amounts of gelatin in his candy. The truly religious person in this framework is the person actively trying to dismantle the unjust economy.
Precisely. Because the unjust economy forces literally everyone into a state of slavery.
Tying it back to the beginning.
Exactly. Remember the very first section. If the laws governing the market are man-made and exploitative, we are all slaves to that system. And slaves, by definition, cannot truly eat free halal food.
This connects so perfectly to the next section in our deep dive, which deals with emergency jurisprudence. Because if we are living in a broken system that makes it incredibly hard to survive without participating in corruption, or if we are in a literal life or death crisis, the rules suddenly change.
Yes, the concept is called idtirar.
Idtirar.
It translates roughly to extreme necessity or unavoidable compulsion. It refers exclusively to a life-threatening situation.
Like literal starvation.
Yes. The classic textbook example in Islamic jurisprudence is a traveler being hopelessly lost in the desert with absolutely nothing to eat but the rotting carcass of a dead animal or a wild pig.
And in that extreme situation, the text says eating the dead animal is permissible.
Actually, it goes much further than permissible. It is strictly required.
Required.
Yes. If you stubbornly choose to die of starvation rather than eat the forbidden meat, you have committed the major sin of suicide. The law dictates that you must eat it to save the life that God entrusted to you.
But there are very strict conditions attached to this, right? You can't just use the emergency as an excuse to have a massive BBQ in the desert.
No, you absolutely cannot. There are two very strict limiting conditions. The specific Quranic phrase used is gaira bagin and wala adan.
Let's unpack those two terms for the listener.
Okay, so gaira bagin means essentially without any intent to rebel.
Oh.
It means you aren't breaking the divine law because you actively want to defy God. You are only doing it because you have zero other choices. You aren't enjoying the taste. You aren't secretly relishing the thrill of rebellion.
You're eating it with a heavy heart.
Exactly. And the second condition,
Wala adadin.
right, wala adadin means without excess. You eat only the absolute bare minimum required to survive. You do not sit down and gorge yourself until you are full. You eat just enough bites to keep the breath in your body until you can find lawful food.
And the text argues that under these two specific conditions, the spiritual harm that Ibn we talked about earlier, that slow camel effect, is entirely suspended.
Yes, because the act is entirely involuntary. The inner self is not degraded because the human will was not actively engaged in rebellion. God essentially throws a protective shield over the self in that moment of absolute desperation.
Now here is where we need to have a bit of a debate with the source material. Because the author makes a direct comparison here between the pangs of hunger and the urges of sex. And honestly, reading this, I felt like the author might be a bit, I don't know, idealistic, out of touch.
You're referring to the question of applying the emergency exception to sexual frustration.
Right. The text asks the question, if I am starving for physical intimacy, can I break the laws regarding sex? Can I commit adultery or fornication? Can I do whatever I feel I urgently need to do to satisfy that overwhelming psychological and physical urge?
And the source material gives a very hard. Absolutely not.
But hold on, I have to stop you there because that distinction feels incredibly academic to me.
In what way?
You try telling a young person completely full of hormones that their drive is just psychological and they will laugh right in your face. It feels like a literal physical emergency to them. It feels exactly like starvation. Does the text even acknowledge that intensity?
It does acknowledge the extreme intensity of the urge, but it strongly disputes the ultimate consequence. And this is where the strict legal definition of emergency of idtirar is completely ruthless.
How so?
The text asks one simple defining question. If you don't get this, will you be a literal corpse tomorrow morning?
So it's a strict mortality threshold.
It is entirely about mortality.
Yeah.
You do not die from enforced celibacy. You might be incredibly miserable. You might become neurotic. You might feel like your head is exploding, but your biological heart keeps beating.
Right.
Starvation literally shuts down the biological machine. If you don't eat, your organs fail and you die. It is an involuntary, fatal cascade. You cannot simply will yourself to no longer need calories.
Okay, I see the biological difference. Starvation is, fatal celibacy isn't. But does that make the sexual urge any less important to a functioning society?
The text argues that the urge is absolutely vital, but in a completely different way. And to support this, the expert in the text brings in some really fascinating outside data. He references a massive study by an anthropologist named J.D. Unwin. a book called Sex and Culture.
Right, this is that huge anthropological study from the 1930s.
Yes. Unwin studied 86 different distinct societies throughout history, and he found a direct measurable correlation. He found that societies that practice strict sexual discipline, what we might call chastity, or maintaining rigid sexual boundaries, consistently rose in social power, in art, and science within 3 generations.
And the ones that didn't.
The societies that embraced total sexual freedom and abandoned those boundaries invariably collapsed or were conquered.
That is a remarkably bold claim to include in a theological text.
It is. The underlying argument here is that sexual energy acts like a massive societal battery. If you just release it freely whenever the urge strikes, that tension is lost. It dissipates.
Like letting the steam out of an engine.
Exactly. But if that energy is sublimated,
Mhm.
if it is heavily controlled and deliberately channeled by strict laws, it actually fuels civilizational growth. It becomes the creative driving energy of the society.
Mm.
So the text argues that sexual discipline isn't just about puritanical morality.
It's about preserving the raw energy of the civilization.
Precisely.
So starvation kills the individual, but sexual discipline builds the civilization. That is the core distinction they are making.
Exactly. One is a biological deficit that ends a life. The other is an energetic surplus that fuels life if handled correctly. That is exactly why the emergency law of e-tirar applies strictly to the empty stomach, but never to the loins.
Okay, I can see the cold logic of it, even if it is a pretty tough pill to swallow for our highly permissive modern society.
It directly challenges modern norms, yes.
But let's go back to the starvation scenario for a minute, because if someone actually is starving and they are forced to eat something forbidden or even forced to steal food from someone else, how does the legal system actually handle that?
And this brings us to the final, and I think by far the most powerful section of these sources, social justice and accountability.
Yes, let's get into this.
This is, in my opinion, the absolute most profound part of the entire analysis, because it completely reframes starvation. It stops looking at it as a sad individual tragedy and reclassifies it as a violent systemic crime.
A crime committed by whom?
By the state and by the society at large.
Huh.
The text establishes an unbending principle. In a genuinely just system, individual starvation should be statistically impossible.
Because the state guarantees sustenance, the risk,
Yes.
like a modern universal basic income.
Actually, it goes much deeper and much more legally binding than that. The source mentions a specific classical legal rule that blows my mind.
Let's hear it.
The rule is this. If a traveler is passing through a town or a settlement and he dies of hunger, he just starves to death because no one in the town offered to feed him, the entire community is legally liable to pay diet.
Wait, diet is blood money, right? That is the strict legal penalty for manslaughter or murder.
Exactly. The law says if you let a man starve in your town, you collectively killed him. The entire community is treated as a murderer in the eyes of the court.
That puts a massive, terrifying weight on the community. It means my neighbor's hunger isn't just a charity case. It is legally my problem. My neck is on the line.
It absolutely is. And there is a very famous historical precedent cited in the text to back this up. A judgment made by Caliph Umar, the second Caliph of Islam.
This is the story about the servants who stole a camel, right?
Yes, it is a landmark case in Islamic jurisprudence. Some servants who were working for a very wealthy local employer stole a camel and slaughtered it so they could eat it, and they were caught red-handed with the meat.
Now, technically speaking, under strict Islamic penal law, the punishment for blatant theft is extremely severe. We've all heard the stories about cutting off the hand.
Right. The penalty is amputation.
So the big question is, did Umar order their hands to be cut off?
No, he did not. Umar paused the execution of the sentence, and he investigated the context. He asked why these men stole. And he quickly found out that their wealthy employer was severely underpaying them. They were literally starving while working for him.
So they were operating under idtirar? It was an emergency?
There's an emergency, but look closely at what Umar actually did next. He ruled that the starving thieves were not to be punished at all. Instead, he turned around and punished the employer.
He punished the victim of the theft?
He punished the root cause of the theft. He summoned the wealthy employer and essentially told him these men did not choose to steal. They were violently forced into an emergency state by your greed.
Wow.
And then Umar forced the employer to pay double the price of the slaughtered camel as a punitive fine.
That completely flips the script on how we typically view law and order.
Completely.
Usually in our modern system, we look at the desperate guy holding the stolen loaf of bread and we say, you are a criminal, you belong in jail. Umar looked at the desperate guy holding the bread and said, who failed you?
Exactly. Who failed you? In a state of extreme emergency caused by deep economic injustice, the divine law totally shifts its focus. It immediately stops looking at the desperate individual and turns its glaring eye directly onto the failing system and the wealthy leaders.
It reinforces that exact idea we were talking about earlier. You simply cannot enforce individual moral piety in a deeply immoral economic system.
You cannot expect desperate, starving people to be halal when the overarching economy is treating them like expendable animals.
It is a stunning conclusion to reach. I mean, we started this whole deep dive talking about the technicalities of pork and dead meat, and we ended up discussing the absolute moral responsibility of the state to violently eradicate poverty.
That is the beautiful nature of a proper deep dive. You pull one tiny theological thread and you suddenly realize it is attached to the entire complex fabric of human society.
It really is. So let's try to synthesize all of this. Let's wrap this up for the listener who is probably trying to process a dozen different layers right now.
Let's do it.
We started out with the fundamental idea of liberty.
We did.
Yeah.
And the core takeaway there is that halal and haram are not diets. They are declarations of political sovereignty. By accepting only God-specific restrictions, you free yourself from all human tyranny. You actively reject the chains and shackles of man-made taboos, and you reclaim your right to the open field.
Then we moved to the specific physical prohibitions. There are only 4. Dead meat, blood pork, and ideological dedications. And we thoroughly debunked the medical myth.
Right. It is definitively not about germs or trichinosis. It is an obedience test. It's about recognizing the sovereign and aligning with innate human dignity.
Then we talked about the alchemy of sustenance, the idea that haram food might successfully feed your biological body, but it actively starves your true self.
It creates that heavy condition of ivm, that slow camel feeling of deep spiritual fatigue and moral paralysis.
And finally, we landed on the systemic requirement. You cannot just be a solitary halal eater hiding in a haram economy.
The ultimate goal of these ancient dietary laws isn't just to produce a person with a clean diet. The goal is a clean society. A robust society where absolutely no one starves, where the economy is stripped of predatory usury, and where human liberty is fiercely protected by the state.
So what does all this mean for us today? For you, our listener, who is maybe driving to work right now or sitting at a desk, what is the practical application of this ancient knowledge?
I think it fundamentally challenges us to take a hard look at the invisible fences in our own lives.
How so? Give me an example.
Well, the text forcefully argues that submitting to arbitrary man-made prohibitions is a literal form of slavery. Now, we might not be formally dedicating our lunch to stone idols today, but how many arbitrary societal rules do we blindly follow?
Oh, tons.
How many heavy chains have we voluntarily accepted from our culture? Society constantly tells us you can't wear that. You must buy this specific brand to be valuable. You must look exactly like this, or you are worthless.
Oh, absolutely. The crushing social pressure, the toxic corporate culture, the endless arbitrary rules of fashion and status.
Exactly. We are constantly being dictated to. We are told what is forbidden and what is permissible by entities that are very definitively not God. Influencers, corporations, politicians.
Right.
The text is practically begging us to reclaim our open field, to clearly recognize that unless there is a supreme higher moral law actively against it, we are completely free. We do not need permission from society to exist.
And on the flip side of that, it demands that we look closely at where our sustenance actually comes from. Not just reading the back of the box for ingredients, but looking at the whole system.
Yes.
Is my paycheck coming from a corporation that actively exploits the vulnerable? Is my comfortable lifestyle secretly built on someone else's unseen starvation?
And that is the truly uncomfortable question. That is the stolen ghee analogy playing out on a massive global scale. And honestly, that is the unmistakable sign of a good deep dive. If you leave this conversation feeling totally comfortable, we probably didn't go deep enough.
Well, I can safely say I am definitely uncomfortable right now, but in the absolute best possible way. I'm going to be thinking about slow camels and open fields for a very long time.
It really changes the way you look at a restaurant menu. That is for sure.
And the way you look at the entire world. Thank you so much for walking us through this text today. It was an incredibly rigorous analysis.
My absolute pleasure. It is a rich text that just keeps on giving the deeper you look.
And to you, our listener, thank you for being a part of this conversation. Keep questioning those fences around you.
And keep your field open.
We'll catch you on the next deep dive. Goodbye, everyone.